Well, we are going to go ahead and get started here. You guys are really lucky to be hearing this session. Aaron, I think this is your second, maybe even third time presenting for Higher Ed Dreamin, and you always just totally knock it out of the park. So thank you again for being willing to share both screens and content with us today. I'll be the coach in this session. So my name is Haley. I'm from Smith College. And I'll be watching for both things that are happening in the chat. I'll be activating polls when we're ready for that, and also asking Q&A at the very end of this session. We have just about 20 minutes with Aaron, and at the very end, we'll ask a couple of those questions if we have time. Just a reminder that that's over on your right-hand side under Q&A. I will come back on, Aaron, when you got about a minute, about 5 minutes, and then 1 minute left, just to keep your time for you. But I'll hand it over to you to do a formal introduction. Here we go.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. And speaking of polls, I did put a poll out there now. I think it's published, so feel free to take a look when you get a chance. And so I'm Aaron Winters with Western Governors University. In case you're not familiar, WGU is a nonprofit university and is now the largest online university in the US. So every week we have about 200,000 students that come to our systems for learning. And I work on the enterprise architecture team. Our team is primarily focused on the availability and scalability of systems, as well as accelerating the technology roadmap. So I joined WGU about 5 years ago, and I've primarily been focused on Salesforce, AWS, and Databricks technology during that time. Prior to joining WGU, I worked for 15 years in the nonprofit sector on different technology leadership and service delivery roles. So the context for this session is that there are a number of use cases for why educational institutions need a comprehensive view of our learners. One common use case we're seeing a lot nowadays is that good agentic interactions in the education industry require augmenting the agent context with learner data that is consolidated from various source systems. Obviously, the ability to segment learners and prospective learners for marketing and engagement purposes is also a common use case. And then finally, university staff and advisors or mentors can provide better support when they can view the learner's full educational background. So the focus for this session is about designing and implementing a comprehensive learner profile. And I'm going to start out by just exploring Data 360, kind of a technology, formerly known as Data Cloud. And think about it as a data platform that can enable these types of use cases, and then talk about the role that data model objects play specifically on that platform. And then we're going to shift gears and look at some education-specific data exchange framework called the Learner Information Framework, and talk about how that can be used to help us design a Data 360 data model. So to kick things off, Lakehouse is a relatively new data management architecture that combines the best elements of data lakes and data warehouses. Data lakes give us the ability to store large volumes of structured and unstructured data cost effectively. And then the Lakehouse aims to address some of the limitations of data lakes by adding support for database transactions, schema management, and data governance. And these platforms have been getting a lot of attention the last few years because of the role that they can play in enabling AI applications by bringing data from many different source systems into a consolidated data store. So obviously Databricks is an example of a data lakehouse, or Snowflake, and all of the major cloud providers have an offering at this point as well. So let's talk about some of the key components of a data lakehouse, as well as the role that each component plays. And then as we're talking through them, I'll share a few examples of open source technologies, just in case you want a concrete example, to dive in further, you can do that. And just for today's session, we're going to focus mostly on structured and semi-structured data, because there's a different set of technologies for working with unstructured data. So starting out with the data storage component in a data lakehouse, there's really three parts to it. We're looking for a storage provider. Typically, it's an object store that can provide scalable, reliable, highly available, and cost-effective data storage for very large data volumes. For file types, we're usually looking at binary file types that are really fast for processing and very efficient to store. And then finally, table format technology is what really enables that sort of transaction support, schema management, brings that sort of capability to the data lakehouse. The next component we're looking at in a data platform is a data ingestion technology. And here what we really want is something that provides a lot of pre-built connectors for various source systems, because we don't want to have to go and build a bunch of integrations from scratch in order to ingest our data. We want something that can handle at least some lightweight transformations, because it has to be able to convert source data to the file type that we're using for storage, and it has to be able to work with the table format technology provider. So you might see a couple different technologies in play here to support batch processing versus stream processing. Then a data catalog in these platforms is typically providing the location or pointing to the location of the data, especially when the data set we're interested in is spread across multiple files. Or maybe there's multiple versions of that data and we need to find the latest version of the table metadata. It's also typically used for enforcing data governance and providing data access controls. For the processing and querying component, we're really looking for technologies that can provide really high throughput processing, as well as the ability to run SQL queries that will use and work with the data catalog to find the location of the data, and then can also work with the table format technology to execute the queries. So there usually are a number of data consumers that are interacting with this component of the data platform. And finally, we need some technology to manage all these components. And so this would be technology that provides APIs or user interfaces for managing the various components. And the capabilities here typically include orchestrating different processing engines, providing observability into what's going on in each of the components, managing the infrastructure, et cetera. And the technology in the platform management space varies widely depending on the technology that was selected for the other components. So I didn't provide some examples, but there's quite a few open source options out there as well. So let's take this understanding of data platforms more generally and think about how it applies to the Data 360 platform. And then as we're kind of going through the various components, I'll highlight the role that data model objects play with respect to structured and semi-structured data, because data model objects are really the core of thinking about that comprehensive learner profile. Again, starting with the data storage layer, we know from reading Salesforce architecture and engineering blogs that Data 360 is using S3 for its object storage, and the files are stored in Parquet file type. And we know that Apache Iceberg is what's being used as a table format solution. But the nice thing is we don't really have to worry about any of those details, because all that is abstracted away, and we primarily just interact with and can experience all that technology through data lake objects. For data ingestion, Salesforce provides a number of pre-built connectors for Salesforce products, as well as there's an ingestion API. So if you have a middleware solution or you want to build your own ingestion pipeline, that option is available. Obviously, there's MuleSoft or Informatica that can be used to quickly extend the number of pre-built connectors that you can work with. And the Data 360 platform supports data ingestion in batch, as well as real-time streaming, and even you can virtualize data depending on the source system and the connection type. So in this space, again, this is mostly abstracted away from us, and we're primarily interacting with data stream objects. So data model objects represent the consolidated data model of data coming from many different data sources, and sort of the canonical view of your learner. Data mappings then point from that consolidated data model back to the data lake objects, which is really the raw ingested data. And then there are a number of security and access features as well that are built on top of data model objects, including the ability to tag and classify the data, as well as to implement attribute-based access control for policies for limiting who can see what in the Data 360 platform. For the processing and querying capabilities, Data 360 provides the capability for external consumers to query the platform, as well as there's some internal querying and processing. And all these internal capabilities are either dependent on or can take advantage of data model objects. For example, identity resolution refers to linking interactions together to the same identity. Segmentation is the capability to query your data and split it out into groups based on different attributes or characteristics. And typically that's data model attributes and characteristics. Streaming and calculated insights are a capability that allows you to query. You can do some transformations, and then typically, maybe a calculation and save that calculated or new data into a new object. Streaming insights can be used to actually send events to data consumers from Data 360. And those are typically referred to as data actions. So you can send events to the CRM platform events, to Marketing Cloud journeys, or even to a webhook to trigger something on an external system. And then for platform management, there's the Data 360 app, as well as there's some settings in the setup menu that can be used to configure all of the components that we just talked about, as well as provide access to external data consumers. And most of the configuration that can be done through one of these UI experiences can also be done through an API. So then there are a number of external data consumers that are really interesting for Data 360 platform. The marketing, is typically a common use case that really was the first use case for the Data 360, formerly Data Cloud platform. And in this area, we have segmentation capability, which is really most of the legacy marketing engagement systems are still using this, where they are actually taking the unified identities and creating the segments within the marketing products. But in the Salesforce world, Salesforce has been consolidating segmentation into the Data 360 platform for their marketing products. So you kind of see those two models depending on which marketing system is being used. So activation in marketing is typically the process where we're publishing a segment from Data 360 to one of these marketing platforms. Another sort of common data consumer would be for analytics, and there is a pre-built connector for most of the popular BI tools at this point, including CRM Analytics or Tableau or Power BI, so they can query and visualize data directly from the Data 360 platform. External applications can get data from Data 360 either directly through code using the JDBC driver or through one of the Data Cloud APIs. The CRM also has the ability to query data in Data 360 through Apex Connect or through screen flows, the flow get records, and then you can also query data from other data platforms, can make queries in the Data 360 without copying the data out using data shares. Within the CRM, there's a number of ways to show Data 360 data in the CRM. One way is to actually copy the data over, where we're doing these calculations using data graphs and then copying that over into fields in the CRM. There are a number of pre-built UI components, so you can actually just have staff view the data directly where it sits in Data 360. You can also build your own custom UI components. Then obviously screen flows also have the ability to grab data from Data 360. And then finally, the big topic of the moment is that Data 360 data can also become available in some of these new AI and agents and generative AI features and products. So one of the key takeaways from this is that data model objects are a central component for every Data 360 implementation. And because they're referenced in so many places by various different consumers, it's really difficult to change the data model design after you've been implementing and building a lot of solutions on top of that data model design. So it's just really important to put some time up front into thinking through the design. So now we know what data model objects are and the roles they play in Data 360. Let's talk about some options for designing the model. And one easy way to get started is that Salesforce provides quite a few standard data model objects out of the box. And this is just a simplified view of some of the core data model objects. Sometimes you'll see this being referred to as the customer 360 data model. And one of the primary benefits of utilizing standard data model objects is to take advantage of pre-built data pipeline solutions, which are called data bundles. This includes the connector to the source system, as well as the definition of the data lake object, and even the mapping all the way through to the data model object. So these data bundles are end-to-end solutions that can save a lot of time, but really only if you're using the Salesforce clouds, like for example, Education Cloud is your primary source systems. So the Education Data Kit, it has some pre-built mappings to key Education Cloud data model objects, which are grouped into 6 different bundles that are shown here. So you can kind of pick the bundles that are relevant to your Education Cloud implementation. And then, of course, there are also starter data bundles for other Salesforce systems, including the CRM objects for sales and service, as well as some of the marketing and e-commerce products. So to wrap up the data cloud part of it, data bundles are and standard data model objects that can be great accelerators to take advantage of if those use cases apply to your institution. But if your learner data comes from systems outside of Salesforce products, or if you want to design a data model to align with the education industry in order to facilitate data sharing and exchange, then you may want to consider designing your own data model using custom data model objects. And so in this next part of the session, I'm going to focus on how to design a data model based on industry data standards, because this approach provides a more future-proof design for unifying data across multiple systems. So the Learner Information Framework is an initiative that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the goal was to help institutions and learners kind of address these challenges around retrieving and sharing their information across many systems, but still giving, kind of maintaining some of these safeguards and data privacy of those records. And the goal of the project was really analogous to electronic medical records that exist in the healthcare system today, where we all can take our records from one provider, transfer them to another, and we kind of retain control over the data. And it gives providers a better view of the patient to provide better care, and it gives the patients better ability to kind of manage their own healthcare. So this is the vision for LIF, to create this type of comprehensive portable record for the workforce to employer sector. And at its core, the Learner Information Framework is a proposal for a common data model that can be used by organizations across the education industry to unify learner data. And in order to develop this common data model, the Gates Foundation brought together subject matter experts from the industry and other various standard setting organizations to go through a research and design process. So the first step in that process was to identify the most relevant data standards. And these are some of the most prominent data standards for describing learners or talent in this space, but it's not an exhaustive list. I just want to call out a couple of organizations that are doing work that I think is especially relevant to this topic. One EdTech oversees the widely adopted open badges standards that I think many of you are familiar with if you're issuing digital badges. They also maintain the comprehensive learner record standard. HR Open is really prominent on the other side of the spectrum. Employers are pretty familiar with some of the standards that are used by HR Open and have been adopted by HR systems. And then the Credential Engine is another one worth checking out. They're a nonprofit that maintains a dictionary of terms in the credentialing space, as well as how those terms relate to each other. The Credential Engine also maintains a public database of all the credentials that are available for adult learners. So the next step in the process was to analyze those standards and identify the common themes, and that was essentially about comparing them side by side against some of the standards that they found were most applicable. And the goal was to try to identify the common data entities and attributes, as well as the common naming conventions. And then the project team used the output from that prior step to design a data model and develop data entity and attribute definitions. So the LIF data model documentation is shared via GitHub repo, and I'll provide a link to that along with some other resources in just a second. But the main takeaway I want to leave you with here is that it would be very difficult to replicate the investment that the Gates Foundation put into researching and designing this common data model for the education industry. So I think it's a really unique resource to leverage when you're designing your Data 360 data model. And just one caveat for Data 360 platform is that there are some standard objects that are just always required. So you have to kind of take the LIF data model and kind of merge it up with some of these required standard DMOs. For example, the standard individual object would have to be used instead of the person object as defined in LIF data model. But for the most part, I think the LIF data model is applicable. So this is a link that includes resources to getting started with the Learner Information Framework, as well as resources related to Data 360. And I'll add the recording for this session once it's available. And again, if you haven't had a chance, there is a poll. Please take a second, and it'd be interesting to see what people have to say. I'm really
Agreed.
happy.
I'm really enjoying that. You got a little bit of everything in there in
Okay.
the poll. So, yeah. Well, and Aaron, I feel so bad. We should have given you like a day, like a full day to just talk about this. Like you went through a lot of content in a short amount of time. So, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and everything. I know we have a couple of questions, and so I just encourage people to reach out to Aaron. He's very friendly and obviously very knowledgeable and amazing. And we'll make sure that this recording gets posted on YouTube and all the slides are available as well. So if you can't get to the link now, you can always get there later. But Aaron, just thank you seriously so much for sharing. Again, like multiple years in a row, we just love having you here. So thank you for all your support in the community. We'll have more sessions coming up here soon. So head on back to the sessions chat and we'll see you in our next sponsor showcase. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Haley.
Great job, Aaron. I'll see you over on the other thing. Feel free to hang out if you need to for a little bit, okay?
Thanks.